Welcome to another edition of the Inspired Stories podcast, where leaders share their experiences so we can learn from their successes and be inspired by how they've overcome adversity. My name is Anthony Codispoti, and today's guest is Oliver Mitchell. He is a partner at FF Venture Capital, a firm recognized for its early stage investments across AI, robotics, and other emerging technologies. Their mission is to partner with innovative founders who aim to shape the future and build market-moving businesses. Now, Oliver has extensive experience in venture capital and technology entrepreneurship. He was previously the founder of Autonomy Ventures, focusing on robotics and automation solutions for various industries. He's also led several successful angel investments, including 2 IPOs and a unicorn now valued at $20 billion. And he holds an impressive 14 patents. Beyond that, he founded Robot Galaxy and is an author of an upcoming book called A Startup Field Guide in the Age of Robotics and AI, which draws from interviews with luminaries in the automation space and offers insights on taking an idea from its kernel stage all the way to an IPO. Now, before we get into all that good stuff, today's episode is brought to you by my company, Add Back Benefits Agency, where we offer very specific and unique employee benefits that are both great for your team and fiscally optimized for your bottom line. One recent client was able to add over $900 per employee per year in extra cash flow by implementing one of our innovative programs. Results vary for each company, and some organizations may not be eligible. To find out if your company qualifies, contact us today at addbackbenefits.com. All right, back to our guest today, the partner of FF Venture Capital, Oliver Mitchell. Thanks for making the time to share your story today.
Thank you, Anthony. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to me, and hopefully we have a great discussion today.
I'm looking forward to it. So, Oliver, today you're a VC with a portfolio that includes IPOs, a unicorn now valued at over $20 billion, and companies deploying humanoid robots in shipbuilding and industrial construction, which we'll get to more in a bit. But before we get into sort of the world of AI, automation, defense tech, I want to go back a little bit earlier, kind of beginning of your career. You actually got started on the agency side of things, Kirschenbaum, Bond and Partners. What were you learning back then that would become helpful in your current work at FF Venture Capital?
Absolutely. That's a great question. And, takes me back a little bit of time, and a lot of things have changed since then. But I graduated from Arizona State University, had a great experience in Tempe, Arizona. Actually, what people don't know is that ASU, we were building the Mars rover around the time that I graduated. During the Clinton administration, they found the meteorite from Mars, which looked like there was some water inside of it, and a lot of money was deployed in building a robot, and ASU was one of the universities that was selected in building that. And
were you involved in that?
I was not.
You're kind of around all that excitement that was going on.
I was around all that excitement. I observed. I had friends, on the engineering team. I was a liberal arts student who was studying history of intellectual movements in the 19th century. But in the backdrop of that, there were people building for the 21st century, and so that was really exciting. And being a liberal arts major in college, I didn't really hone in on what I wanted to do right away. I came from an entrepreneurial family, but first generation American. My parents were Holocaust survivors. My father went into the restaurant business. And so I knew I wanted to do something entrepreneurial. And I had the opportunity to intern at really the most innovative young agency at the time, Kirschenbaum and Bond. I joined their internship program. It was a great program. And at the end of August, I was like, I really want to continue here. And they're like, well, we only have one job available, receptionist. I was like, I'll take it. I'll take it right away. And actually, and back then being a receptionist mean like the phone was like as big as my wingspan, with like 100 different extensions. And you mess up many times in transferring calls and stuff like that. But you actually learn the most about the agency because everyone's walking in and out. You're seeing, all the new pitches, all the CEOs and getting them water, from Nabisco to Snapple to Motion on Hennessy, and you really are the pulse of the agency because you are the first ambassador they see. And so, um, you know, we represented Snapple in the early days, and of course, being a receptionist, the only thing we could drink up front was Snapple, and it really I gave it all I could, and it was a lot of fun. I ended up getting an account role. Which meant that I was a doormat because in a creative agency, you're pulled between, the creatives, the art directors and the copywriters and the client. And you're the one sort of trying to act as diplomat to try to fuse these two perspectives together to get the best product. And it really was a lesson in team building that I take with me. And I really had great times. They don't do this anymore, but every Friday we had drinks trolley and it come by, and it was a big party until somebody got really drunk and started making a pass at a client. So they took drinks trolley off campus and so forth like that. But it was a lot of fun, really great culture, and I was frustrated because I was working for somebody, and I knew I really wanted to be an entrepreneur. So I left the agency world, taking all that branding experience, more importantly, taking all that team building and cultural experience, and went into merchant banking. I did a lot of deals. I did some SPACs before
Explain what
they.
merchant banking is for our
Yeah,
audience.
merchant banking. So there's investment banking, which, is very expensive, high end banks, whether they're bringing companies public, whether they're doing large mergers and acquisition. And then there's, venture, which is deploying capital within the private markets in a very early stage. And merchant banking is going for that middle market companies that have revenue, have EBIT. And you're looking at opportunities where you can have the closest path to liquidity. And so, we worked with Kelstrom, founded by some Israeli jet and Air Force pilots, and we sold Pratt Whitney jet engine parts, and we took that public then via a SPAC. We were one of the first people to do SPACs, and then we did Boeing Telecommunications, we did Moto Guzzi, we did a number of companies, and then I ended up researching an opportunity that came out, which was to take ATMs outside of bank branches and charge, a surcharge for that. And I said, there's a business here. There's new legislation that came out of Congress enabling us to actually own ATMs, being that we're not banks, and place them outside of bank branches. And so we created Americash, myself and two other partners, and we built that up within 32 months to a national network. And I had up sales and marketing there. We had Simon Malls, we had Federated Department Stores, and we eventually sold that to American Express.
So I got to back up here because I feel like we skipped over something. You went from being a receptionist to an account rep, and in your words, kind of a lowly account rep, right? You were sort of the doormat.
Not lowly account. I was
Okay.
account management. It was not account man. I was account management. So that means I work with a client and I try to take the client's um, um, everything about the client's brand and try to crystallize it within a creative brief, and then work with the creatives to try to translate that into whether that's broadcast, TV commercials, print, POP, guerrilla marketing. And sometimes the creatives overreach and they get really passionate about it. And sometimes they take a really long time, and we bought ad spots and so forth like that. And so it's a lot of managing a lot of balls in the air. And to do that, you're not the one doing the creative, so you're not getting the pat on the back, and you're trying to make the client happy when when sometimes they get frustrated with the process and so forth like that. They're like, this is not what we want. Our logo has to be bigger.
Gotcha.
How is this going to roll out? And so you're trying to balance all that together. And within an agency, there's the account team, which manages the client. Exactly that. There's traffic, which actually shuttles the creative around the agency for approvals and making sure everything stays on track. So account teams work very closely with traffic. Traffic tends to be very frenetic personalities because they're never at the desk. They're always running around, and especially, back then when things were less digitized. And then there's the creative teams, which are, account directors and copywriters, and of course there's media, which is buying all the media out there.
But how did we get from here to merchant banking? This feels like a big leap, or was it just an opportunity that kind of fell
It
into
was
your
not.
lap?
It was an opportunity that fell into my
Okay.
lap, and just like I grabbed the receptionist opportunity, I grabbed this opportunity. And so after we sold Americash, um, it took us 32 months to build up a national network, and we sold to American Express, and it was a very good outcome. I had the startup bug in me, and I created my own startup then, which was this was the Internet 1.0. I created actually a aggregator of arts and humanities and parks and recreation activities called Destination Boulevard. And then I ended up incubating that within another startup that was more well funded called Screen Media, that was backed by another ad guy called Jay Chiat, who was a legend, Chiat Day, in the world, and a mentor of mine. And then I ended up joining the executive team of a company that Jay founded called then Softcom, which later became Interactive Video Technologies. And similar to what we did in the ATM business and bring them outside bank branches, we were taking video and bringing it to the internet. And we were one of the first ones to do that. And we worked with HBO on a new hit show that they thought they had called The Sopranos, creating telewebbing applications. We worked with Showtime. We worked with E! Online for the Academy Awards, Home Shopping Network with Joe Montana hawking footballs. And we became, this platform for publishing video for broadcasters online, um, and grew that and to a sizable organization, and had funding from Intel, Sun Microsystems, Allen and Company, Tudor Private Equity. It was the very much so a a company of the internet bubble. We had sales, but our funding was definitely ahead of what we were projecting. And two vignettes from those days is like I remember going to um, one of our investors, and I had a whole roll-up strategy for acquiring all the encoding shops, which were taking analog content and digitizing it to MPEG. And I was like, this could be a great way for us to front load, all the content out there, and we could like do a roll-up strategy. And so, relying on my M&A merchant banking experience and stuff like that. And I'm like, this is great. This is great. We could raise then, $200 million, which was a big number in 2000. And they're like,
And
what
then
do you
something
need?
happened.
Well, they're like, what do you need? I'm like, well, it's going to take me time to, do a full diligence here, come up with a whole spreadsheet, come up with a whole platform, everything like that. No, 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 no. We could raise 200 million just on a PowerPoint. And you knew something was broken there. And the other, story there is I used to say that the happiest and saddest day of the internet back then was when the company moved into their new office space. And so we went from like, in like a Rudin building, which is like, where we had on 55 wall, we had like 100 people like stacked into 4 rooms. You couldn't even move chairs. When you went out to the bathroom, you hit somebody this way, you hit somebody that way. And then we moved into 30,000 square feet where like the engineers were riding bicycles and skateboards around. And then I brought in Bear Stearns, back then Bear Stearns, it's no longer around, but as our bankers, and I was really close with them. And I live in New York, so you can hear the sirens outside.
Absolutely.
And that they were like, "What's going on here? Like, what happened to your office before? What are you doing with all this money?" And this is not good optics. I was like, "Well, I'm not in charge of like leasing the real estate here. I'm in charge of like the the marketing and the financing and so like it was like one of those times like where the people felt like the need to go out and like wear the gold Rolex to everything they're going and just creating bad optics, for their shareholders and for the industries. And so the bubble burst, and from there, I'm giving you a long overview here, but I went into um, uh, a family office. I went into my own management consultancy, which fell into a family office. I was partnered with the Hermes family, and I
I
turned
mean, I
around a
think we
really,
see a pattern here. Like
yeah,
Oliver Mitchell likes to swing big. Yeah. We're not talking
yeah.
about little side projects here. It's like you go all in. And so then what happened with the
This
family office?
So I went to the family office, and they were partnered with the Hermes family, the French atelier, and we had both software holdings as well as real estate holdings, and I managed a very pretty big, like $500 million portfolio there, and it went from another bubble where they acquired a building on Fifth Avenue and put down 5% equity on the deal on a $300 million note, and of course the backer then was Lehman Brothers, and so.
Mm.
And so from there, I really started to iterate. I was at a young family, and I created my own another startup called Robot Galaxy, which was like Build a Bear for Boys, where kids get to build their own robots. We had 8 characters, and from there you could create 1,000 different variations. We had a comic book story, so there was a whole narrative, and kids came in and they chose their core and their flexors and their extenders, which are the parts, and they put in a fuel cell, so the robot would say their name and nickname, and then from the comic book, they would birth the robot by launching into the seventh ring of Saturn. And we had stores where there was an 8 foot, ring of Saturn, and like it would light up, and everyone in the store would count down, three, two, one, little Billy launching,
Sounds like a fun idea.
Buzz to the seventh ring of Saturn, and the kid would wet his pants, when he saw his robot come to life, and it was an amazing thing, and we had a really good run, and we had some good backing, and yeah, and we had stores here on the East Coast, and then we
What
rolled out
eventually
with some
happened to that company?
Toys R Us. Well, you're going to ask like lessons learned, the
Mm.
company, and we can return to it. I ended up the company, went into the headwinds of 2008 financial crisis, and a $40 robot without a movie became very hard to
Mm.
sustain. And we had our own stores. We had shipping shops in Toys R Us and here in Times Square, and opposite, Darth Vader. So if you got $40 and it's Christmas, what are you going to spend on a robot that no one knows, or Darth Vader who has a whole library?
But just to get those partnerships with Toys R Us, that has to be a process in and of itself. Like they must have seen something there that they saw
Oh,
promise in.
absolutely, absolutely, and we had some very good discussions. Near the end regarding acquisitions and so forth like that. Yeah, it is. I mean, we had a really good brand. We had a great media coverage. We were on the Today Show. We were on Rachel Ray. 7 minutes on Rachel Ray turns into $50,000 instantly. We robots were on the Today Show. I was on the Big Idea with Donnie Deutsch. Our stores looked like a fuselage, and they changed colors, and it was beautifully designed by the late Richie Altoona, who was all about interactive retail. Really an amazing. Person and brain there, and our characters were really great, and we had a robust comic book story that was published by IDW, who published Transformers, and we were shopping around. We just did it back assward. We were shopping. We should have started with a movie and before
I was
going to
going
the
to ask if you
toys.
had it to do over again, would you have started with a movie or would you have tried to partner with an existing brand and say, let's layer this idea on top of the existing IP for a Darth Vader or something else?
It's very funny. I would have. So the first gut answer is, yeah, I would have started with the media, and we had opportunities within the media. And I don't want to say names in such a public forum, but we actually near the end had an opportunity with a big media company to create a whole children's sort of series and everything like that. And then that media company got acquired, and so they acquired in go forward with the content. We also had an opportunity from a large media company that owns lots of characters, and they were trying to attract more boys to their properties. And we were a great brand, and we were a very big brand in the sense that we were a toy company. We were we had interactive. So the phase two of what we did is that our fuel cell had a USB that you plugged into the computer, and there was a multiplayer virtual world. And so, as kids played games, they got new downloads to a robot, new eye colors, new raised from the comic book, and their status raised from cadet to commander. So we had this interactive component, and so we had a media component, we had an interactive component, we had a hard goods component, and then we were next to the big Ferris wheel that's no longer there in Times Square, Toys R Us. So the media property had a theme park, we also touched on that. And so we became too horizontal, where too many parties had to approve our acquisition there. And it became a little bit of a fiefdom. But their whole thing was they actually had their own characters, and they were thinking about like build your own character from our library. And so that was actually an interesting thing. I think, a lot of lessons learned there. And I guess we're jumping to the last question, here, but is one is it's one is, the in the consumer space, the power of marketing, beyond like such a great idea is so critical. And, we thought we can launch it initially with retail, you know, masses of assets passing your store with great location, great appealing retail. And we did. And we had a great, when we opened up, we did about $500 a square foot in Toys R Us Times Square. In a smaller location, we did about 1,500 a square foot. Birthday parties became a destination business for us. But it really, like when times became tough, it was not sustainable because people, had to decide whether they're going to spend their money on, food, heating oil. $40 at Walmart, could be a month's of groceries, for some people. And so that, so without that marketing, that air cover, so that's really critical. I also think, plastics, plastics, hard goods is really tough, and retail is really tough because you need so much turns of inventory there. And with tooling and plastics, it's very tough. We did some creative things, coming up with new colors, new patterns for the robots, but it becomes very tough. And so you got to really, when looking at this now for startups that I advise, you got to look at the whole cycle of the business, and you got to see, where are the areas of optimization. So, to your question, could you do a build up and use the same core for everybody and so forth like that to bring down your costs, increase your margins?
So, as somebody who had a lot of success leading up to this, now you have this great idea, you got some momentum, and then you just hit a brick wall. The economic downturn, and the whole thing starts to just fall apart around you. I have to imagine that is. I mean, it's one thing to sit here and say like, yeah, that was hard, but sort of behind the scenes, like gut wrenchingly hard, right? There's a lot of money in it. There's a lot of people who were counting on this, and it was a great idea that was working. And now all of a sudden it's like, oh, now what do I do? What happened?
Yeah, and I was one of the bigger investors in there, but I think more importantly, like I was in charge of 200 families, and I always say this as an investor, like so many VCs, come from Goldman, come from Deloitte, but don't have payroll experience and don't lay awake thinking about all those people that rely on you to feed their families. So yeah, I mean, the people that invest in me, their lives are not going to be substantially changed. You know what I'm saying? They're accredited investors, but those people that lost their job, it's a big deal, especially senior people, and so that's what kept me awake at night. Um, but you pivot, you persevere, it's fourth quarter time, and we were talking about basketball before, and it's really, I didn't, get depressive about it. I said, okay, we didn't plan for this. Let's pause all the leases that we were going to sign, we're going to, and let's slow down the inventory. Let's think about how we can, create newness without investing in new tooling because tooling is really expensive. You know, let's now go through the M&A route. And we did, with that media company, which was the first opportunity. They approached us through relationships. At the same time we were shopping a movie, we went to every studio, we started to network there, outside, of our immediate network within, retail and the virtual gaming space. We'd go to, every week we'd go in, to LA and the Valley there, and we'd go from studio to studio. We get networked into this producer and that producer, and we'd get some really good traction. And we'd pitch a movie, we'd get a showrunner, and so when the M&A opportunity with the big media company came by, they made me sign an NDA that like put my children up for barter if I broke it. And so like we had to pause everything. And so one thing, uh, being now on the investor side is like big companies can be very disruptive to small companies. And so like everything became paused. Like every deal was like, is this good for this company, this big media company that's looking to acquire us, or is this bad? And they were not interested in investing. They were like, we're not good investors. We just acquire. And like, is this good? You know, do we need to like negotiate our writers? Do we need renegotiate the IP? Do we need to, and so like so much brain power goes into that. And I would say, we didn't hire, we had somebody who got us into, who had a relationship with the CFO, but we didn't hire an outside advisor. And so I think, it would have been better if we had an outside advisor. And a big lesson learned there is, the value of a banker like that, to be that third party who can have discussions that you can't have with that acquiring entity where there'd be awkwardness. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, kind
Um,
of remove
yeah.
sort of the emotional aspect of it because
Not the
they may.
emotional, but just
Hmm.
like, just there's like awkward things where it's more comfortable for them to speak in third party about how the acquisition would work and so forth like that. And this went on for 5 months, and yeah, and so I always advise people today to get a banker involved. Spend the money. It's a big number, but spend the money and so forth like that. And then, after that fell through. That was devastating, Anthony. That was like we like, you know had our whole mindset on that, and they ended up acquiring a bigger company that had more media properties to address, what they were looking for. And we're like, okay, let's go back to the showrunners. Let's go back. Let's sell this into a TV studio. Let's go back. Sell it in New York. Sell it to the execs there. Now let's go to Hollywood. Sell it into the producers there. Now let's go here. And we went back and forth with this big media property about merchandising rights, about all this stuff. About the new show. This is exactly what they want. The showrunner and everything like that. And we sold it in, and then they got acquired, and their acquirers like, we're pausing all new production. And so we're like, oh shit, now what do we do? So they're like, okay, private equity, let's go to private equity. And we sold it into private equity, somebody doing a roll up within the toy space. But then I was just like, you know what, this is a really bad deal, because while I might do okay, the people that came in early, they're going to be like squashed. And because the company is still continuing in the private equity, they can't even take down the tax write-off. It's actually a really bad deal. So I ended up, rather than doing like sort of a dignity sale, I ended up just shuttering the business, and
Oh,
and
wow.
having to tell those 200 families, like we're closing up and everything like that. Yeah.
So wait, walk me through that a little bit more. I want to understand this at a
You
granular
don't want to
level.
hear
Why?
about the investing part.
What I
Yeah.
really want to get to is FF Venture Capital and the work in robotics that you're doing with some of your
Yeah.
portcos. But I just
But
want to understand the
yeah.
decision making process to shutting it down versus getting something for it.
Well, we were just not ordering new inventory, and our inventory became out of whack. And the right flexor, which is an arm, would be the motorized one. The left one would be this one mechanical one. And so the right one sold faster than the left ones. And like our product, like it was getting kind of ugly, and just like it didn't reflect well on the brand. And we were like, you know, um, we sold into like department stores, for holiday, our keychains. We had a great keychain gift pack, and our big robots would sell into. We were in all the catalogs, but it just became very tough. And the brand it was sort of on life support. Um, and you know, at a certain point, the retail stores just were not, the payroll was just killing us because in a mall store, you have to be open when the malls are open. And Monday through like Thursday, it's dead. It's just mall walkers, So like, it's just a killer. Um, and so, and it wasn't just us. Like at that time period, like people were just dying, and so the right thing was to just shutter
Shut it
the
down.
company. Yeah.
Okay.
We took it as far as we could. We went through three different acquisition opportunities.
Yeah.
We got really close to the target, but at a certain point, you got to fish and cut bait, and just like you're throwing good money after bad here, and it's time for everyone to move on.
Okay. So speaking of moving on, let's move on
So so so
ourselves.
so so I did. So I'll tell you the story of like
Yeah.
how I became getting into robotics. It's a good segue because around that time, people were so a year before that, blogging became really hot, and people were like, you got to improve your profile online, Oliver. And I was always known as the robot guy in New York. Like people would be like, "Hey, there's Oliver. He's the robot guy. You got Robot Galaxy. He's the robot guy. Come here, robot guy." And like in the investment community and everything like that. And so I was the robot guy. Then this guy
Toy
creates like
robots at the moment.
toy robots, but I was
Oliver's dances.
nevertheless
Yeah.
I was the robot guy,
Yeah.
right? And there's a lot of similarities between manufacturing toys and actually big robots. A lot of the microprocessors that are in toys or like were in big electronics 2 years earlier and stuff like that. But somebody who was sort of a friend of the company's like, you got to like improve your profile, and out there, it'll help, with the M&A stuff and everything like that. We're going to create a blog for you. Okay, I'm like, that's cool, that's cool. Okay, we created a blog. We're calling it Robot Rabbi, knowing that I'm Jewish and everything like that. I'm like, okay, but I'm not really a rabbi, but it's cool, Robot Rabbi. Don't you love it? And they had and the logo was like almost like if you could look at robotrabbi.com, it's small now, but it's like these RRs. It looks like a Hasidic Jew, and I was like, okay, so what am I going to do with the moniker Robot Rabbi? I can't really be like sale on flexors today. That's like kind of boring. And then I was just like, can't really write about myself. I don't really have that much material. Why don't I look at the real robot? A rabbi is a teacher ultimately. Uh, you know, and so I'll be like, okay, I'll teach about real robots. And so I started to like look at the robots, and I started to say like, what is the societal implication? And I sort of like morphed into like, what's the business going on here? Like, and somehow I struck a nerve with the industry. I'd be like, what's the value proposition here? How is it going to get high utility, reliability, and payback for customers? And so I met, a lot of great people, and people would come to me and like, and they'd be like, can you speak about this? And I'd be like, yeah, sure, I'll speak about it. And then the speaking engagements grew, and I would speak at CES and South by about, the robotics business. And this was 2000, started in 2011. And then Kiva got bought in 2012. So it started to get a little bit of of interest there. And then I started to meet these really great founders. And so, and I still like, was an investor, and you mentioned angel investing. I was a member of New York Angels, and then I organized my own investment vehicle called Autonomy Ventures. It was not really marketing solutions; it was investing in startups. And so I built up a portfolio. I had a bunch of investments, and over a period of 6 years, I had eight of them that exited. Three exited really well. Two went public. One of them being Exobionics, which is an exoskeleton for paraplegics. Another one, an Israeli medtech device called Novacure, which went public. And one time it was worth about 16 billion, and then it it trades today, market caps around between 2 to 3 billion. And the other one, which was an AI company in ad tech called Triple Lift, which is not worth 20 billion. It's worth it got sold for 1.4 billion. And so I built up a really great portfolio of companies, and I looked at the robotic space, and I became really well known for these early investments, and I became known for my articles. And then I would publish every week. Now it's more like once a month, and all those, got into, some of those more audacious articles that I've published are in the book, and I'll talk about the book later. But it led to the book, the blog posting, and so after that, track record, two friends approached me, John Frankel and Alex Katz, and they're like, "Hey, listen, would you like to join us and really help us open up deep tech?" And they're a generalist New York fund. They were founded in 2008. Back when the market went down, they were optimistic about investing in, and they leaned into it. They were one of the first people rebuilding the tech ecosystem. After 2008. And I was like, yeah, this is amazing. And so, we made investments like Plus One Robotics, I'm wearing right now, that's in the logistics space, e-commerce, logistics. We made investment in Burrow, which is in agriculture, about towing, things around orchards and vineyards, and really turning them into Amazon fulfillment centers, with all autonomous vehicles. Also, Civ Robotics, where I sit on the board of, which takes construction tech and making it autonomous for solar farms
So can
out
we
there.
go into a little bit more detail on one or more of these companies? Because I mean,
Sure.
you're sort of giving a high level, and people are, wait. I want to hear more about that. Pick
Okay.
one yourself that I don't know, the autonomous warehouse setup. Which company was that?
Well, that's plus one. Why don't you speak about Civ Robotics, because I think
Okay,
that's a really great one because they pivoted and everything like that. So I've been investing in Israel for quite some time.
and why
Back in
Israel? I mean, just because of the Jewish heritage, or there's something else at play?
Well, it's both. It's both. One, I have a strong affinity. My parents were very involved in the early days of the state. I just found a letter from Moshe Dayan, who was the former defense minister during the Six-Day War, to my father and so forth like that. And Teddy Cogg, the former mayor of Jerusalem. And so my parents were very involved in the early days there. But Israel, I would say, has one of the best tech ecosystems in the world. Um, for foreign countries listing on the Nasdaq, it is just it's like number two. It has over 250 Israeli publicly traded companies on the Nasdaq.
Why?
Uh,
Why
um,
Israel? Is this a small
because
country? Like, why does it have such a big
yeah,
impact in tech?
so there's a few reasons for it. One is Israel is very much so an entrepreneurial society. It has an immigrant society where, since the founding of the state, you had Holocaust survivors that came. You had the Sabras who were living there, continuously for thousands of years, and you had people coming in from, in the early days of the state, you had 800,000 people, refugees that came in through the Arab countries when they were kicked out, and so you have this immigrant society. When the Russian, after the Iron Curtain fell, all these Russian Jews, over 2 million of them came to Israel, and you still have that today from France, from the US. And so immigrants are naturally entrepreneurial. They leave their born networks and they're recreating themselves. You know, that's number one. Number two is everyone is conscripted into the army. And the army takes very young people. And actually, the Israeli army works almost opposite than the U.S. Army, which has a huge hierarchy. The Israeli army, everything is at the at the sort of the foot soldiers level, and so you'll have an 18-year-old in charge of like 200 people,
Oh wow.
and so that you do have ranks, but I mean there's so much there, and they have a lot of responsibility, and this is before they're going to college. And what happens in Israel is that in the US, kids going to high school, they're thinking about college and they all want to go to good college. In Israel, kids all want to go to the great units because and certain units produce really great startups. And so, especially the cyber and the intelligence units, the largest unit in the army is Unit 8200, which is the intelligence unit. And so Israel's a small country with lots of enemies around it, and it has to operate smarter than just big weapons. So, um, and so already in high school, teams are forming because the army is giving aptitude tests of who has a propensity for this high level of physics, mathematics, of coding. And so people are grouped, starting like say sophomore year of high school. And by the time they graduate, they usually go to what's called Mechina, which is like a gap year program, which is pre your army. So whatever army unit you're going to go into, there's a Mechina there that's preparing you before you go into that unit. And sort of think of it like ROTC in a sense, right? And so, I actually have a son who wants to do like Navy ROTC. And so like, he's going to college and doing ROTC on his free time. And so this is like, they're doing that not just half day, they're doing that all day long. And so these teams are forming their high school, post high school, and then that they're in the army. High stakes, high stress, and huge bonds are forming. And so out of A200 Shmona Tayim Talpiot, which is a special sort of physics unit that crosses over different divisions. You have the Shin Bet, which is like the FBI, but for domestic terrorism in Israel. Then you have the Mossad, which is international. You have Sar Makal, and these high units produce these amazing, teams. And so when people are done, with their service after, depending if they're going to be an officer, 3, 5 years, they're like, okay, what are we going to do now? Well, I love you guys. Let's start a startup, and let's go
There's a
back to
lot of
the
kinship, and there's a lot of
knowledge,
not knowledge because
right?
they've
And
been
they know how
working
to
at an
recruit.
advanced level from a young age.
Right. And they're not scared of failure, right? That immigrant they're not scared of failure. In the US, there's so much built up. You're going to Harvard, you got to do this. You can't fail. In Israel, okay, I failed. Okay, I'll do another startup, and so like they'll, so they go into it and the people that they actually raise capital from. They're all alumni from the unit. They're working at funds. They're doing this, and so and this is something that I'm exploring right now is how to leverage that in a fund and so forth like that to get to those deals. I'll give you an example. A company in the defense tech space, Kela, founded by a lone drawer who comes from like the Shin Bet, and Hamutal, who ran Palantir in Israel and also came from the Shin Bet. They founded a defense tech software company called Kela. Within 6 months, they raised $100 million
Wow,
from Sequoia, Lux, and In-Q-Tel.
big
In-Q-Tel
names.
is the fund of the intelligence agencies in the U.S. And so, all that knowledge base, all those teams, the ability to recruit from all those units, creates great startups. And so, I've always had good relationships in Israel. And so, I was approached by the Technion, which is like Israel's MIT, about a company called Civ Drone. They were, bless you, they were out of the Drive Accelerator, which is an accelerator up in Haifa. And they were taking drones to do surveying for construction. They were two civil engineers that worked in construction, new construction, and really liked them. I thought what they were doing really had merit. I was like, listen, next time in New York, let's get together. And we got together. And I was like, there's an accelerator just 4 hours, north of here called Genius New York, and it's the largest accelerator for uncrewed systems in the US. You should really go there, and it'll be a launch pad for you to enter the US market. And if you're do really well there, you can get between $500,000 and $1 million. And they won the prize there. And I introduced it to FF in 2019. We invested, then sort of in a pre-seed round, and then we led the seed round and brought in other investors. And we just they pivoted and I interviewed Tommy Shorn in my book. Um, when they were doing their customer discovery, I was like, yeah, I love drones. I love drones. This is a great idea. I love drones. And then they went out to the market and they're like, okay, we got the drone. And they had this beautiful drone. It was like, it must have been like 7 feet wingspan, at quadcopters, and it actually did autonomous staking and everything like that, and it connected to the cloud. So if your plans changed, the drone's flight path would change. It was amazing. Then they went to their customers like, okay, we got the drone. We got the drone. They're like, yeah, I said I love drones. I never said I was going to buy a drone.
Oh,
And so they're like, what we really need is a terrestrial robot that can go, and it doesn't have to stake. We can have just one guy. We got to get all these teams together. You need 16 guys. It takes 3 months to book them. It really holds up our development, especially in solar. If you can do this and create a robot that can mark all the places and do, that can be 10 times faster, half the cost, more accurate, we'll buy that. And they're like, okay, okay. So they went back.
that's
They
a
were in
big pivot.
Israel, yeah, and they created that robot. They're like, okay, we got the robot, and now they're killing it. They're based in SF now. Their sales are phenomenal. They just had the best quarter. They're expanding internationally in Australia, in the UAE, in Saudi Arabia,
What
in
does this
Europe.
robot look like? Like from a physical
Um,
perspective, does it look like a human, or is it like like a
No,
cart
it
that
looks like
rolls
a
on
box
wheels?
with four wheels. Sometimes those wheels are actually not round; they're like lunar wheels, depending on the surface. That's going. So the robot uses just RPK GPS to figure out all the coordinates. It's usually the first thing, before a solar farm is built, and so it doesn't need to have vision on it. So it's about a 5 foot box with wheels, and as a
Explain
piece.
RK GPS.
It's you have those guys with the tripods and they're marking everything and everything like that. So it's doing it digitally,
Okay.
and so it puts a laser or it does spray paint depending on what the customer wants. And then there's a guy following just so rather than 16 guys, you got one guy with a hammer and a flag, and he's just following along it, and it goes all day long. And so it can do, hundreds of thousands of points within weeks that
Wow.
would normally take months. And it's half the cost and 10 times faster and more accurate because
And
humans make
so,
mistakes.
is the plan with this company to introduce more use cases for the robot, or this is a big enough use case on its own? It's just get it to more people
Right.
doing what it
So,
does.
so about 70% of the business is solar, but there's data centers that they can do everything in horizontal construction. So like roads and so forth like that. They also have so Civ Dot's the main product. They have Civ Dot Mini for striping roads, but now they're going to come out with Civ Move, which is going to be an autonomous material mover, and that will have vision. That will be in an active construction site with people around it, and it can autonomously move, the piles and this
Like, how big
and
will
the
this
solar
be?
system.
What will the size of the payload?
It can be pretty big. Think of it like a skid steer, an autonomous skid
Okay.
steer. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, like think of it like skid steers like a forklift in a
Yeah.
warehouse, and so yeah, and it's moving very heavy. The piles are very heavy. The solar cell is very heavy, but it's really moving things around the construction site, and this is going back to that customer discovery. This is something their customers ask them to build. It's not something that they're just brainstorming. And a customer says, like, if you build this, for every Civ dot we buy, we're going to buy 6 to 8 of these. And so, there's real high demand from their customers for this. And so that's what they're on track with. They just closed their Series A. They brought in some great investors. And the investor that I brought in the previous investment round with FF, who co-led with us, AliCorp, led this round, and so I'm very happy that we're getting the cap table. You want to construct the right cap table that can see a company through multiple cycles.
So when most people think robots, they think like Terminator, they think like a humanoid form robot. And what you just described is obviously a very different format, very functional and useful. Are you involved with any startups that are sort of making the more, Rosie from Jetson style kind of human type form of robot?
Yes, I am. So, I mean, so most of the robots out there are very that we've invested in at FF are very utilitarian, right? Vision systems to help cobots with, wire harnessing for cars and picking bin picking, on manufacturing, or vision systems around cobots for logistics. We have drones that are doing deliveries of fast food, you know, but then outside of FF, I am an advisor to Persona AI. And Persona AI is founded by Nick Radford, Jerry Pratt, and Jita. And they all came, Nick and Jerry were at NASA, and they built really the humanoid robotics lab, and they built Robonaut and Robonaut 2. They didn't just build Robonaut 2, they launched Robonaut 2 to the ISS, and then they built Valkyrie. After that, Gita and Nick founded a company called Houston Mechatronics, which later became Nauticus, which was taking almost like transformer like robots, which is an autonomous, robot to go undersea, which is even more complicated than space, because in space you don't have to worry about things living on your robots, and down in sea, undersea, that had arms that came out, and for whether for cables, for oil and gas, for conservation. And they built that company from Nick's living room all the way to taking it public. And last year, Nick was sharing with me his idea for a humanoid company, and we were talking about, and I was like, there's optimists and there's figure out there, and you
Optimus
know,
from Elon Musk,
Tesla, right?
Tesla.
And Optimus, I was like, is the most well suited for the home, right? They already sell consumer cars. They already have a financing arm for consumer cars. If you go to a Tesla showroom, there's always an Optimus, a static Optimus there, just for eye candy. And I'm like, you know, they potentially could launch, a robot in the home. The home's most complicated environment. Every home is different, toys, mess, what have you. But they potentially could launch it and finance it in such a way that it costs as much as like a housekeeper or a nanny, right? And they could lose money on it, just to get that data, just to get it in the home, sort of like an Alexa device, right? Um, and then there's like Figure and Aptronic, which is going into light manufacturing now. Figure wants to go into the home. And Jerry was formerly at Figure. He was the founding CTO there, and and he lives in Florida. He has a humanoids lab there, for really looking at the cutting edge of humanoids there. And and so, but no one's really addressing, in the world of robots, there's dull, dirty, and dangerous, right? We spoke about dull, bin picking, really tedious, dull jobs. Dirty, Civ Robotics, working in a Mojave Desert at 120-degree heat, really like dirty work, right? Construction, but dangerous. Like, who's doing that? And I'm like, guys, you guys are the only ones that's launched a robot to space, the most dangerous environment there is. And so, and leveraging the hardware that they built, they've licensed it from GM and NASA, because that was a partnership to build Robonaut. And so they actually have the best hand out there, the most dexterous hand out there. And they're going into dangerous jobs. And the first customer, which was announced, is Hyundai HD, and Hyundai Robotics and Vazel for shipbuilding and
Shipbuilding,
shipbuilding. And so
like big giant
welding,
boats.
like giant
Okay,
boats,
all right.
right? Uh, and and China leads shipbuilding. At one period of time, we led shipbuilding in the Navy yards, just across the East River. We were building 1 to 2 ships a week there.
Wow.
In World War II, the USS Missouri was built in Brooklyn, and it was the Can-Do shipyard. That was what it was called. Now, last year, the U.S. built all of 5 ships. Not so great.
How many did China
China,
build?
300.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Big
So,
disparity.
but the second most builder of ships is Korea. South Korea is a big ally of ours. And so, and Hyundai actually, besides making cars, make ships. And a really dangerous and hard job is welding these steel hulls together. A guy has to go with a welder, hunched over, and you can't put these on a conveyor belt. These are heavy. He's hunched over, climbing over each of these hulls, bringing them together and welding them. And this is a great job for a humanoid, right? Why can't that guy now have a fleet of humanoids at his disposal that he can control? How many years can someone be hunched over with a welder? Like the light where his eyes starts to go, his back starts to hurt. It's a dangerous job. The toll that it takes on a human being. And then if you take that to construction, right? You take someone who in a mall who's just doing drilling like this up in the ceiling. That's hurting the shoulder. That the workers' comp claims on that is humongous. You take a loading dock. The amount of pressure that puts on the lower back. Now you go into mining, right? Coal mining. How much fumes can someone breathe? How many rocks fall on somebody before they go to a doctor and they get oxy and they get addicted to oxy in West Virginia? There's it's by no chance that Purdue Pharma chose, the coal mining centers to introduce oxy to get people addicted to it. And so like these are great jobs for humanoids. These are horrible jobs for humans.
Are
And
the
so,
are the
so
humanoids ready for this kind of work? Like is the
yeah,
technology
so
there?
yeah, so two things. One is to finish it. So if everyone else is building like a Toyota Prius of humanoids, Persona AI is building the F-150 of
Wow.
humanoids,
That's
the
saying
tough
something.
humanoid. Yeah, the tough humanoid. And they're doing it, they were just on Fox and Friends because Trump's big thing is bringing back shipbuilding to America.
Okay.
And long term, Trump just in the big beautiful bill, that's what he calls it. They just allocated $34 billion for shipbuilding in America. Or to make that possible, they better make a phone call to Houston to Persona. So now, yes, the technology's ready for it. The technology's here. There's two things that have been instrumental. You know, First of all, they have the technology. They've done it on the space station. Now they're bringing it down to Earth. Number one. Number two is we have a lot more processors and actuators and at a smaller scale, that enable the mechanical aspects to be done more efficiently and less expensively. And number three is we have all this data and all this and now foundational AI models. And so now the learning for a humanoid has been shrunk because you could take all the simulation data and now the robot could actually have more knowledge than it'll actually see in real life. And I have this today with my portfolio company Cambrian Robotics, which works in smart manufacturing, especially for automotive. And one of their big things is wire harnessing for cables. And wires get kinked. Wires don't operate like widgets. Wires, will go awry. But because they've trained it, the robot, using
And it
AI,
trains it with like thousands of hours of video of like watching human beings do it.
watching, yes, and just like or watching robots do it. What will the robot do when the wire goes awry? It's all simulation. It's more the robot. It's not. It's the robot going. So of understanding the path planning. It's not really the human doesn't like think through the path planning, but the robot has to think through the path planning to get that wire
So
that's
it's
not
trial
in.
and error. It did this, it didn't work. It did this, it didn't work. Oh, it did
And
that, and it
it
works.
has so much more. So now it sees that the wire's gone awry and it's mission driven, it's deterministic. It's like, okay, I know what that is. And it goes back on the path, clips it back in and plugs it back in. And that's really big. And now that's if that's possible for a cobot, which is this one robotic arm, that's really possible with a bipedal humanoid robot.
So You mentioned before about how a persona, one of the advantages they have is having the most dexterous hands. Has that been an impediment up to this point, and how close is it now to what a human can do?
Yeah. So dexterity is sort of the final frontier of robotics,
Okay.
right? And so that is really the key, you know. And but dexterity has to be within the knowledge base of these foundational AI models, and they're going to be creating their own, in addition to using what's publicly available. Um, so your last question, like how close is it to a human?
Yeah. Where are we today in terms
Yeah,
of
I
what
don't
can?
think it should. I don't think. So I think we're far off. So so a humanoid is somewhat of a Swiss Army knife, right? That it's versus just a single purpose robot, right? A humanoid can do many things. And one of the great things about a bipedal humanoid is it can walk like a human. It can go in between things. You don't have to change the workflow of a factory floor, of a mine, of a construction site. The world is built for humans. A humanoid has the gait of a human and can go in between things just like a human can. A humanoid, can use human tools. So because it's using a hand and the grasping and so forth like that. So you don't have to create new end effectors, new drills that you're gonna, new
It can work
appendages.
within the existing ecosystem. Yeah.
Exactly. And so that's the big opportunity. How we create that library will take time, you know, and it will start with these tasks. And as these tasks grow, you will have a wider library of opportunity. Think of it like an autonomous vehicle. An autonomous vehicle, it's been going on now for 20 years and getting all this knowledge data of of navigating, the road, understanding how humans drive. And humans, there's a law, and then like there's like the culture. New Yorkers drive very different than people in LA. People in Bangalore drive very different than people in New York. So like, how I stop might not be like the letter of the law, where I go in and so forth. So a robot has to understand and navigate that. It has to understand what a fire truck is, right? A big complaint of Waymo was like the fire truck, the sirens go off. It can't hear a siren. It doesn't know what to do and so forth like that. But now you go into a Waymo in San Francisco within a geo fenced in area. You're not worried. You feel very comfortable. You actually feel like this is better than Uber. It doesn't smell. Sometimes my Uber smells. It's perfectly the temperature that I like. I don't have to worry about that guy being cold and me being hot. I can have my music. You know what? I can eat some food back here. No one knows. Like if the food upsets my stomach, no one knows about that either. So like, so it's just like it's a better experience. And it knows those streets there. It knows how people drive there. It knows where it needs to go. It creates that knowledge base. But it has to start within that geo-fenced in area, and then it can expand that territory. Likewise, the humanoids need to start with these tasks of shipbuilding. Then it can go to, construction drilling. Then it can go to these other tasks. It will not, I think it's far, that's why the home is sort of like the most complicated.
I have so many more questions I want to ask about robotics, Oliver, but I want to make sure we leave enough time to talk about your book. So we're going to do this last. Before we get to that question,
Well,
though,
my book is about robotics.
great. Then I'm even more excited to hear about it.
Yeah.
So, if folks want to get in touch with you or follow your story, what's the best way for them to do that?
Really the best way is Oliver Mitchell on LinkedIn. Send me a message. I'll respond.
Terrific. Okay, so new book coming out. It's about robotics, and the title is, tell us.
A starter field guide in the age of robots and AI.
And why write
Uh,
this? What was the inspiration behind it?
yeah, so I teach entrepreneurship. I teach an MBA course called Entrepreneurship and the Management of Change. And I'm a big fan of Steve Blank and Eric Ries. Steve Blank and Eric Ries wrote a startup owner's manual. Um, it's a great piece. I teach it in my MBA course. I also teach lots of case studies of different startups out there. But I found that within the world of robotics and AI, it's a different animal. So if you were launching a software company, by example, you have so many investors that are interested in that. But if you're launching a hardware company, that world shrinks really fast. The margins in hardware are different. The business models in hardware are different. Hard tech, you know, working in industry, shit can't fail. When people are understanding, back in the early days of Windows when you got a blue screen and you got to reboot your computer, people are understanding on that. They've been trained on that. But if a technology, fails within industry and people get hurt or it becomes fatal, that's it. That autonomous vehicle kills somebody, and there's been
No room
instances,
for error. Mhm.
right? And so people have very little patience for that, and so so I felt the need that um, for a different type of book for people, starting with the kernel of their idea, with the concept, and understanding how to, drive their customer discovery and learning from really the experts and industry leaders in the space and taking it all the way through M&A, through IPO, and all the paths in between. So it really, you know, I call it a field guide because just like I'm a big backpacker, and just like before you go in to a new area, you'll take out the field guide, understand the terrain, understand if you have to, forage for food, what to get, what are the supplies you're going to need, what's the weather patterns there, and everything like that. And this is likewise a field guide for entrepreneurs.
And so, when is it coming out, and where can people find it?
Sure. It's coming out on June 18th. If anybody here is going to be in Boston on June 11th, I'm having a book launch party and we'll have books there at Mass Robotics on June 11th at 5 p.m. And you can go to the Mass Robotics website to sign up, or you can see my LinkedIn post. Um, and there will be Robotics Invest and Robotics Week in Boston around that time as well. But if you're unable to attend that, you can buy it on Amazon. Just type in a startup field guide in the age of robots and AI or Oliver Mitchell. Or you could go to Routledge Press, my publisher's website, as well. Um, and yeah.
And another little shameless plug for you, Oliver. Are you looking for more deal flow, or are you kind of locked down on the port codes that you're working with currently?
Um, that's that's a really good question. So always looking at interesting things. Currently, our fund is fully deployed, but at the same time, um, I have a unique position with my firm, and so I can do things outside my firm as well.
Okay, terrific. Oliver Mitchell, it's been a fascinating
But
conversation. Like I said, we could have kept talking about robotics for a long time, so maybe we'll have you back at
well,
some point in the near. Oh,
yeah,
sorry, you
I
got
mean,
something else you want to throw in there?
yeah, I wanted to share a vignette on the
Yeah,
book. Just tying a bow around everything is that
yeah.
one of the first stories I speak about is Mick Mounts, who built Kiva Systems, and he didn't,
This was the one
you
that's
know,
purchased by Amazon. Moves
for
the
$775 million, and it's still one of the bigger purchases in the robotic space. And it paid for itself within 18 months. They were
wow.
shipping 2 billion packages by utilizing this. And so, you know, so Mick, he didn't, go and say, I want to build a robotics company. He saw a problem, and he saw that problem during the Internet 1.0 days with Webvan. And Webvan was one of the poster childs for overfunding, and went public at $800 million, and they blew through all this cash, and they built these beautiful distribution centers. And Mick was in charge. He was an engineer there, and he was in charge of, these fulfillment centers. And he saw that there was nothing addressing this new type of e-commerce because These distribution center systems couldn't do pick and pack. They just were about full cartons, and e-commerce was just starting. And so he saw this problem, and I go through this in great detail. And after he left Webvan shortly before they went bankrupt, he started to, ideate on what later became Kiva Systems and with two other partners. And he's like, you know what we got to do? We got to bring the shelving to the picker. And they reorganized how a warehouse operates. And they actually, not only that, but the Kiva Systems reorganize the shelving based upon the best sellers online as well. And so they're on the perimeter and the dogs are on the inside. And so, like, it's just one of many vignettes that I go through in my book of like how to successfully create a business utilizing these advanced technologies to address real problems in the industry.
And I think that's a great place to start when thinking about a new business is what's a problem to solve? What is a pain point for folks?
Customer discovery. It's all about customer discovery.
Yeah. Well, Oliver Mitchell, FF Venture Capital, I want to be the first to thank you for sharing both your time and your story with us today. It's been fascinating. I appreciate it.
My pleasure, Anthony. Thank you.
Folks, that's a wrap on another episode of the Inspired Stories podcast. Thanks for learning with us today.